Justin Stone Diaz. Is he the last occupier standing in New York City? Well, before I leave that provocative introduction alone, let me expand on its context before we really have that interview with Justin. Um, Obviously, he and others are not the last occupiers remaining in New York City after the Zuccotti Park eviction, but I could make the case that he is singular in the way that he stands in for and up for the Occupy movement almost from day one. Now, at the moment, he and other stalwarts are involved in Occupy Sandy. And for those who are not up to OWS doings, Occupy Sandy was mobilized by the movement the day following Hurricane Sandy. They were the first on the scene, even before the Red Cross and certainly before FEMA, to begin digging out and helping to feed the storm victims. So, what made this different from Zuccotti Park was that there were no police barricades keeping the occupiers out. In fact, as many police and firemen actually lived in the affected areas, there was more of a demonstrable sense of appreciation and gratitude. I believe Occupy was seen through new eyes. So how do you go from being people on the outside to people on the inside? And is Occupy going through a metamorphosis? And if so, it's a healthy one. So let me do that by introducing Justin Stone Diaz and welcoming you to the show today, Justin.
Hey, Jerry. How you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Thanks so much for spending some time with me. Now,
yeah, I got to ask for a small correction, though.
Sure.
You mentioned in your intro about Occupy Sandy being first responders, and that we came before FEMA and Red Cross, and we actually worked side by side with them from the beginning. There wasn't any organizational separation, so I just want a small correction on that, because both Red Cross and FEMA have been getting a lot of slack from grassroots organizers, including myself, who's been a vocal critic of Red Cross and FEMA. But we work side to side with them from the beginning, so I just wanted to be clear on that. So,
well, I do stand corrected. I know that there's always urban legends that that somehow sprout, and one of these is.
Well, I mean, it's just that the mainstream media again didn't understand and still doesn't understand what's going on and what's occurring with Occupy Sandy and Occupy Wall Street. So, it's like when we were in the park, where everybody had an expectation of what they saw in the media. I mean, they saw us giving out water and, giving out free supplies to these people in need, when actually we're helping these communities help themselves through mutual aid and community rebuilding. So it's been a real amazing experience being involved with this part of Occupy right now.
Well, let me talk about that then, because of all the many faces at Zuccotti Park, at May Day demonstrations, at working groups, feet on the streets, rallies, yours was noticeable. I'm speaking from my own experience of you, of course, but it always seemed that you were there to excite, if not incite, both police and protesters. So,
they're very similar.
What's that?
Well, those two things are very similar. So yeah, I had to laugh at that. Major upchunkles.
Well, you have to. One person's excitement is another one's incitement. So tell us about the involvement and at that point, and the changes, of any, that have come about since you've been in Occupy Sandy.
Well, I mean, just like as I was mentioning, like working with local government officials and organizations, and doing what we've always done, occupying space and providing space for community dialogue or community interaction through reclaiming of the commons, or just inciting an area to be more interesting, incentizing it often. Protest signs, but the thing that people never really saw with the media, as I was mentioning earlier, that within Zuccotti, we had a full mutual aid community going on where we fed ourselves, and there were schools there were most of human needs, even to entertainment and education, were covered through our mutual aid. This naturally arises through these grassroots efforts that Occupy seems to be involved with whenever they happen on large scale. So it's just been interesting seeing that people have been asking us, like, oh, how is Occupy Sandy different from Occupy Wall Street? And if you look, there's no different. We're just helping other people besides our own community. Our community was very large on a daily basis, but now that we're working with these, communities that are in need and are asking for long-term help, the skill set that Occupy provides through direct democracy and ability to have facilitated conversations, and opening up a neutral spaces where people can come in non-commercial settings and just interact where that, organic people talking to each other, and it emerges out of that some kind of product where we could, hang out and talk to each other and have these conversations about, what is sharing, what is charity, what is mutual aid. Because right now, all the major volunteer organizations and NGOs are pulling out, and the only volunteers that are on the ground, as in the beginning, are Red Cross, FEMA, and Occupy Sandy. So it's been really interesting watching the swelling and the shrinking of the Occupy movement again through this Occupy Sandy experience. But now Occupy, the 300 to 800 of us are embedded within these communities, either short-term or long-term. We're not in a park doing what we used to do. If you look around, there's people's libraries showing up. You go to community meetings and they're taking stack. You see the hand signal spreading through community organizational groups. So Occupy Wall Street was always just a tool set of direct democracy that happened to happen in a public space, and it coincided with the Reclaim the Commons.
Well, I find it fascinating that what was learned and almost in some cases self-taught, in other cases organizers like yourself who had a background of being grassroots community organizers,
Exactly.
came in to create a culture which presumably was blown to the winds when Zuccotti Park was emptied. And what you're telling me is that these seeds now have they're really in a place that they're sprouting, and some of the same culture is happening, but in a different environment.
Exactly. I mean, the context and the location is spread out through many areas, and if we can keep the Occupy Sandy community together through winter, we'll have Occupy Wall Street in all 5 boroughs. And Occupy Wall Street is all it really is a group of people who seek to have conversations around, whatever topics they want. But yeah, so it's been interesting.
Well, in my experience, I came to Occupy as a curious person. I come from a background in business, and I know certain things work in business that are required. There's what they call the people. You have to have people, you have processes, and you have to have technology. Now, I know that you have always been more than feet on the street, because you've also been involved with the technical or operational sides of Occupy, and you're a self-styled digital native. So how does that apply and play out in the real world in what you're doing in Occupy Sandy?
Well, I mean, I always lucked out having a similar name to Justin Wheatus, the first Occupy celebrity that emerged out of our culture. But it's the thing is that in order to keep a sustainable community going, you need front people, and you need people who can, get the information to each other. And I'm part of the information working group, which just through the front line for a lot of things in Occupy, because Occupy, it turns out, is just a lot of information sharing that is accessible to all. It's just a matter of having access to the technology or these networks of trust that are created within grassroots efforts. Occupy is a very large basket that many tool sets are falling into. But it's amazing to see things not evolving but spreading and changing slightly, layering upon the achievements of the last, experiment or side of Occupy. Because Occupy always, the only thing we could really agree on were those 3 words, Occupy Wall Street. And if you have conversations with people who were the original occupiers, it was about showing up. It was about occupying physical space and having conversations and dialogues, or even, just sharing silence with each other.
Well, let me address that part, because I've seen some of the things that you've written about this, and I know that you feel that Occupy falls into Occupy 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. Would you mind going through each one of those and explaining how Occupy is evolving and where it seems to be going?
Well, yeah, you're speaking of the Occupy versions. Occupy's native language is social media and Twitter, so a lot of the grassroots organizational efforts we do happen in real time on Twitter. So things are often condensed down to a very short easy way to transmit in 140 characters or in small data packets in one way or another. Sharing small bits of information is really what grassroots organization is about in the end. So the versioning of Occupy, the Occupy Wall Street within Zuccotti Park was Occupy 1.0, occupying public space in opposition to things. We took over a park, didn't really intend to, but it kind of just happened organically. And we had intended to occupy Wall Street, but we occupied a park instead and used emergent design principles. And we learned through open source software, and something emerged out of that, and we call Occupy 1.0, Occupy in Opposition. Occupy 2.0 is post-Zuccotti, after the eviction and occupying without location. Occupy 2.0, Occupy without location or occupation without location. This is where you saw the rise of the micro-encampments, the sleeple protest tactics, and a lot of the flash mob and a lot of the play and theater, guerrilla theater, entertainment side of Occupy came out as informational ways to protest and give information at the same time. So you saw Occupy kind of, as you mentioned, the seeds going out in all different directions. Currently with Occupy Sandy, it's Occupy 3.0, which is occupation in existing communities. Right now you're seeing a lot of Occupy community organizers that have been looking for ways to be helping communities do what they want to do. And like personally, I work with a community tool library that loans out tools to people rebuilding after Sandy. So that's Occupy 3.0, and the vision now is Occupy 4.0, which is the next step. The idea behind that would be occupation with intention. Occupy has always been a matter of reaction to current situations, usually crisis. Occupy has a really good way of working with capacity and capacity building in organizational strategies that Occupy can work with from 3 people to 3,000. It has economies of scale designed into the tools and the way we communicate that allow it to organically grow when it needs to, and also shrink when it doesn't need to be 300 people. You've seen that through the debt strike and the debt jubilee working group. Occupy 4.0 is Occupy with Intention, which seems to be something we'll talk about at the national gathering, which might be occupying city blocks that we buy back from areas and then intentionally occupy these spaces or city blocks.
Okay, I get it. And I can see how, looking at those 4 stages and where you are now versus where you feel Occupy is going, I can see how Hurricane Sandy helped to reintegrate Occupy into the community. And part of that dealt with a new importance that was given by Occupy to churches and by churches to Occupy, to activists like you. So tell me how that came about.
Well, it's no coincidence that Occupy has had a long-term relationship with the faith-based communities. If you strip down Occupy's version of community organizing, it walks and talks very vague but very specific on codes of ethics and ways of interacting. Occupy stresses things like culture of consent. Don't touch or record someone unless you ask them. And it's just interesting seeing these things spread and become more useful in different contexts, like the usefulness of having a facilitated discussion where people don't talk over each other and they have a hand signal but like yell to each other to, hey, I can't hear you, without yelling at each other. So, yeah.
So how do pastors and priests respond to the fact that you're bringing very, as a loss of calling it anything else, very Christian principles into the church, but using a new way of expressing this? So have they been welcoming this?
Using the golden rule as a way to kind of structure yourself in organizational structures. Like in Occupy Sandy, we have an anti-marginalization Skillshare, where we suggest when you're working with people in general, not to say anything with an ism in it. Anything that your grandmother might raise her eyebrow about, you may not want to engage in when you're trying to do grassroots organization, because you want to be all-inclusive. So ableism, sexism, genderism, racism, anything with an ism, you might want to stay away from. So that kind of inclusiveness that Occupy suggests and encourages, and also through its free kitchens and feeding its community, the churches see that we're allies in the same work, and our needs of community overlap, and it's always made sense for the churches to help out Occupy. Now that Occupy is much larger and we're much more focused on what we're doing, they're very supportive in what we're doing.
Well, this is very heartening because I know over time a number of obituaries have been written about Occupy's demise.
Yes.
Just 6 months ago, a Huffington Post reporter, a great reporter, a guy I know personally, Saki Kanafo, wrote a piece called
He's a great writer.
He's a great writer. But what he wrote was, Occupy Wall Street, what happened? Because in that article he described an organization that was broken down, broken into factions of street people versus working group people, little communication, basically that Occupy had fizzled. Did he get that right?
Well, I mean, he scratched the surface. Occupy has always been two movements in one. There's always been the hard grounders who you see at the protests and the people you tend to see in the front line. And then there's a larger community of people who are stakeholders in our community but aren't physically present in New York City where the actions take place. So these two communities have always been in divide that way. And his article got glimpses of that, where he saw the traditional organizational structure through the crowdfunding that the Action Resource Group did, which would later informed the work of Occupy Sandy. You got to see how, yeah. Sorry about that.
Would you repeat that? I lost that last part.
Tell me where to pick it up.
You were talking about he got it fairly right, but he
the two sides of Occupy, that he saw the what you would say is the homeless or kind of the grungier protest activists, and the indoor, Harvard graduate, Brown graduate organizers who were, doing budgeting and things like that, and structuring how to have committee meetings indoors, with a disconnect with the homeless and the street. A bit too black and white, but it's more about the frontliners and bottomliners and stakeholders. It's our community is very diverse, and if you just take the first glance at it, it can be very confusing, and it can appear like there's two sides that don't get along in Occupy. But that natural difference in the two type of organizers and the two type of people that we tend to, cultivate and bring in natively, that internal struggle is what defines Occupy. Instead of having to, have intellectual debates with other organizations, Occupy is always self-critiquing itself, like the radio program on WBAI Think Tank. If you know how to look for Occupy, Occupy's been out there from the beginning in many sources, and it keeps on multiplying. But if you looked for just the physical New York City OWS NYC, it would appear that we had nearly fizzled out. I mean, at any given time, Occupy is about 300 people in New York City active. Mm-hmm. It swells to 800 to 1,200, depending on what time of year it is. And he got to see us right before our one-year anniversary, mm-hmm. where our activists were very tired, and a lot of us were doing other projects until Sandy reunited us.
Well, this is the amazing resilience of Occupy, and one of the reasons why 15 Minutes of Fact came into existence was to put some historical perspective and personal experience out on the air so that people would be able to compare what you're telling our listeners to what they would hear on mainstream media. So I want to thank...
Well, that's the thing, that this is mainstream media at this time. I mean, Jerry, let's just keep on going for half an hour. You can split this into two if you need to. But Jerry, I want to finish this conversation with you.
Go right ahead. Okay.
That because of the way that the world's changing, the type of content that we're creating right now is the mainstream media. That the market is so split up, and people are looking at such specialized content that the 800 to 1,200 people that you reach through this show will help shape a lot of these interactions going forward. And the history of this movement is not written yet, and it's still being written by the participants, which include you, because I know projects like yours would really help keep a clear vision on what Occupy is and giving Occupy a chance to speak for itself. Because one of our tenets in our community is speak to us, not for us. We encourage people to, when they want to help someone, to ask them directly and let those group of people or that community organizer to express what they need and don't spin it for other people.
Based on that description, I think I'm living up to expectations.
Yes.
Well, I want to do this, Justin. I want to thank you on behalf of our 15 Minutes of Fact listeners and fans for sharing that story with us. And I want to be sure that we can enable them to reach you personally. So what is your email address?
Well, all you have to do is just Google me. It's Justin Stone Diaz, and you can find me on most social media platforms. I'm quite Googleable.
You are every bit of that.
Yeah.
Okay, one last question. And by the way, this will be the first of many interviews I'm sure we're going to be doing. One last question this time around. Many moons ago, I saw a cardboard sign printed out by someone in Zuccotti Park that proudly stated, "I lost my job, but I found an occupation." So is Occupy your occupation now, and do you recommend it to others?
Well, that's the thing, that when Occupy came together, the core of us realized that we'd been occupying most of our lives, living in parallel to the collapsing economy that's going on, and building another world possible that Occupy speaks. So OWS and Occupy Wall Street did was bring us together and allow all of us to take the next step. So being a full-time activist, it takes a lot more hours than 40 hours a week to do it. It's more like 60 to 80 hours a week. But I do recommend it. I mean, it's the punchline, get a job, and Occupy Wall Street and Occupy Toolset and Occupy Community. It's a lifestyle. We spend most of our time supporting one another, running, apartments and, Occupy foreclosed homes. We still have 35 homes that we're occupying that under the radar. There's lots of projects that Occupy is getting away with, but just because we're not looking for media attention for a lot of it, you don't see it. I'm going to end it there.
Well, that is sufficient to this conversation. This is Jerry Ashton of 15 Minutes of Fact here on WGRNradio.com, thanking Justin for his time, as well as thanking you, the listener, for stopping by to learn more about social change movements and the wonderful people involved. Be sure to search me out where I blog at the Huffington Post and follow me on Twitter as @WrittenOffUSA. Thanks so much, Justin.
Thanks, Jerry. It's great talking to you. Occupy everything.